Welcome to Parallax by Ankur Kalra, a podcast produced by Radcliffe Cardiology to bring you a new angle of all things cardiology and the best from the US Cardiology Review. Published every second Monday, Ankur Kalra, MD, interventional cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, USA, speaks with legendary cardiologists, reviews late-breaking trials, and interviews authors of our latest and best US Cardiology Review articles. We call them #audio articles. Parallax is the effect whereby the position or direction of an object appears to differ when viewed from different positions. So this podcast is your fix of reliable updates on all things cardiology by someone from a non-traditional background who is always looking at the industry from a new angle. Now, here's your host, Ankur Kalra, MD.
Hello, everyone. I have the honor yet again this week of having with me Dr. Kavitha Chinnaiyan. As we all know, we're doing these mini-series focusing on burnout, resilience, success, and how to basically survive in a hostile environment, which I think we bring to work, ourselves. I think what Kavitha will share with us are incredible insights into mindfulness and meditation, bringing concepts to life from the ancient old text of not only Hinduism, but, just a text for mankind, just to answer the pivotal questions that, all of us at some point in our lives, ask ourselves, as to, why are we here and what is the purpose of life and, how to find happiness. So, Kavitha, it is my absolute pleasure and honor to have you on the show again.
Thank you, Ankur. It's so wonderful to be able to talk with you and do this. And it's really an amazingly fun conversation. And hopefully everybody who's listening to this will take away bits and pieces that are applicable to them.
Sure. No, thank you for, arranging for time on weekends. I know we've been recording on weekends, so I thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Sure. And I think we should start from where we left last time, which was, we talked about burnout. We talked about, competition at work. We talked about the sense of Schadenfreude, envy or, jealousy. And all these complex emotions we all face as professionals, at work. And then, we ended the conversation, saying that we will discuss more about success, and what that means. So, success means different things to different people, right? It's a very it's a subjective word, and it's got connotations which have completely different meaning for different people. So, I just want to get insights into, from someone who's very mindful and who practices meditation on a daily basis. What does success mean to you? What is success for you?
That's such a good question, and in my younger years and as a cardiologist, as a trainee and an early career cardiologist, success to me at the time meant being more published, doing well for my patients, providing the best care that I could. And it all came at a very high cost to myself because, I had role models and of what I thought was, that's what success looked like. And that's how I wanted to be. But over the years and, with my own practice, success for me is really first of all, I don't even think about success or failure. It's not even something that even occurs to me anymore. But for me, I think a life well lived is one where we have opened to the entire spectrum of human experience, and to be able to savor all of that in this absolute joyfulness, I think is is really truly what success is. So it's not about acquiring anything, be it in the form of wealth or notoriety, or certainly not papers or positions and things like that. But it's really whether I'm savoring this moment as is with all of its different colors and textures, or am I worrying about something that doesn't exist because it's in the future, or doesn't exist because it's in the past and dead? So it's all about, everybody talks about the present moment, but there is no such thing as a present moment, because by the time you say present moment, it's already gone. It's in the past. So it isn't really on a linear timeline at all. It is the now is not it's not a point in time. It's not a discrete point in time. It is this constant freshness of experience, which is what the now is. So, and so that's the answer you get from somebody who's a meditator rather than from a perspective of a cardiologist.
Yes. No, it's a fascinating answer. It's something which I've learned from a very good friend. It's something that she taught me, last year, and I started realizing the power of just being in the moment. It's something we, at least I was not practicing at all. I mean, I would ruminate. More so plan for the future than ruminate in the past is how I've come to think of it. When I now think of it, sort of the shift in my thought process that has occurred over this past year, there is a lot of power in just being in the moment, right? And it's as cliched as it may sound, or I'm saying cliched because it's become so popular in social media or even in lay press. It's just there is a mindfulness movement going on, and I'm not sure whether people really appreciate mindfulness as much as it is being talked about. Obviously that does not relate to you, because you are a very advanced meditator, and I'm just starting my journey into meditation and mindfulness. But for our audience, the vast majority of which I feel are cardiologists, either established cardiologists or cardiologists in training, or residents or house staff or even fellows in training, how would you practice mindfulness at work? Just a regular day at work. How would you bring that into existence as a busy cardiologist who's trying to get through the day, seeing patients, trying to deliver the best care feasible? And all of us at some point either have or will or are going through tough emotions at work of not being able to salvage a patient, or doing everything that we best possibly could, and yet having to face an outcome which we were not prepared for, and then having to then have tough conversations with families. I mean, how do you keep the epicenter of peace intact at work, utilizing this concept of mindfulness?
Yeah. So, I think to answer that question, we should just step back a little bit and talk about, what we actually mean by mindfulness, because most people use that in the context of feeling good for now. It's like saying, okay, go do some yoga or go do some meditation and then calm yourself and come back. And although that is fine, that doesn't lead to the kind of transformation that needs to happen that results in resilience. And because it's if we use mindfulness or meditation or any of these techniques as band-aids, that doesn't get to the root of the cause, right? It doesn't get to what is really fundamentally going on in the mind. And so if we look at, what we mean by, why is meditation or mindfulness transformative? Well, there are many reasons for this, but one reason is, just looking at the brain, there are two distinct networks that are in play in the brain when in the waking state. And so when we are busy with a task, such as writing or talking to someone or paying attention to something, there is a distinct neurological network known as the task positive network, which is active. And when we are not engaged in a task, there is another network that becomes active, which is called the default mode. So you can imagine the default mode network is called default mode because that's what the brain switches to when it's not always engaged with something. And so if we look at our entire waking hours, very few of those hours are actually spent focusing on a task because constantly the mind is wandering. And when we say the mind is wandering, it means it's switching to the default mode network. And so the default mode network, what does it do? So if we examine what the default mode network does, it is constantly circling around me. All my thoughts are going to be about me, and it's all based in our early childhood and early life experiences and how, what I think, what I feel, what I want, what I don't want. So it all centers around this, and it's not very distinct. These thought patterns are not very distinct. They're remnants, fragments of thought and fragments of images, memories, and so on that are constantly going on in our internal landscape. So we keep switching back to this again and again. So, people who start meditating, they say, well, I can't meditate because my mind is so busy. It's not that, your mind becomes busy when you start meditating. It's just that you become more aware of how active your brain actually is, your mind actually is. So this default mode network, and if we examine the activity of the default mode network, it's a constant foray into the past, into our past experiences. It could be what happened yesterday, or usually it's what happened years ago, which are just very vague and subtle kinds of impressions that are in the mind. Or it is something we are projecting into the future. I want this, I don't want this, I'm going to do. It's like this worry/anxiety that's always going on. And it doesn't really, of course, qualify for a clinical diagnosis of anxiety, but it's just this rumination over the past or the future, just as you were saying, about your own experience. And that is true for all of us. So when we say meditation, a long-term committed meditation practice actually works on the default mode network and takes away all of those remnants of thought and images and everything that goes on in there and quiets that. It quiets the default mode network so that the mind becomes very quiet. So when you're not actively engaged in a task, there's nothing going on. There is nothing to be thinking about except being involved in what is happening currently. So when we say be in the present moment, it's impossible to be in the present moment if your default mode network is active. It's impossible. So that's why we need this training with a regular meditation practice for that mind to become clear and quiet. And so when we look at what causes stress, right? It's a combination of things. It is this beating up of ourselves, right, which happens when we are thinking that the outcome of our patient care should look like something, whether you're putting in a stent as an interventional cardiologist or I'm prescribing a medicine as a non-interventional cardiologist. We are wanting a particular outcome. And when things don't go our way, that's what causes stress, because we think that's what it should look like. And we discussed last time that and we are also influenced by, all the trials and the data, and things should go this way. And of course, things do go like that for the most part. But what we don't take into account is that it's not dependent on just you or me, right? None of these outcomes are just dependent on you or me. It's also dependent on what the patient's going to do, how they are going to be influenced, what kind of medication they end up taking, the batch of medicines that, if you keep going to a 30,000 foot view, you'll see that we feel like we are isolated in our decision making, but it's not true like that at all. Even for us to have come across this patient, for them to have found us, so many things had to go on in a particular way for that to happen. And we forget that, so we take ownership of this. And we feel that, I'm the one that causes this patient to feel better or to not feel better, when that is only partly true. And because it's a whole system and a whole, unseen and unseen factors that bring in the patient and the doctor together, right? And we don't see that. We're only seeing this, so we take complete ownership of it. And so one of the things we should remember is, if you're going to take credit for somebody's life, you're going to have to take the blame for their death. But the rub is that we are responsible for neither.
Yeah.
So, and so, when people say, I saved your life, or it's so arrogant, because that's not true at all, right? In a grander scheme of things, first of all, it's not their time to go, and you just happen to have facilitated that. But we don't see these things, and we, again, it's the lack of insight into how things are connected in a broader way. And that's because of this rumination because our default mode network is all centered around me. So does it make sense? So it's just, you can see how, because we are constantly focused on ourselves all the time, even when we are thinking about other people, most of the time we are thinking how that relates to me, And so most of our thoughts are about us, and it's not a flaw. This is human design. So we need to understand this is not a flaw. This is not somebody's fault. It's just how all of us are built. And so unless we cultivate, a way to step back and look at our own processes, we simply can't become resilient. And resilience does not mean we become like stone walls, right? We don't become,
Sure.
Cut off from the world. It's not that. It's to be able to joyfully engage while still being, detached from the outcome.
Yes, you've explained this beautifully, and when we were talking off the line, off record, we were discussing how these thought processes or these principles are inherent to our upbringing, back in India, because it's just a way of life, and then you get transplanted to an individualistic society like the United States, where granted, I mean, many things are well oiled, and things work, and people are well intentioned, like you discussed, or maybe Madhav discussed that in the episode that I did with him. There are inherent biases, and there will be. And then I really liked how you put the two systems of thought processes together. I'm not sure if, these are all central theories in psychology, but I sort of read this in a book. I don't know if you've read this book. It's the book is called Thinking Fast and Slow.
No, I haven't read it.
Yeah. So, it's, what you explained is the exact, congruent, concept of the two systems that we, you'll actually enjoy reading this book a lot. It's by Dan Kahneman. He's a psychology professor, or professor emeritus at Harvard, or has been a psychology professor at Harvard. I think he's won, the book is New York Times bestseller, and he's won several accolades for the work. But what he goes to is essentially what you discussed, is a default system which all of us are working in or operating in. And then there is a more complex system. So anything that requires more analytical thinking or mathematical calculation, we will then shift our mind to system 2. But system 1 is just a default system that we work with. And it's funny, and he's done several experiments on these, and he's actually shown this very scientifically, how the subconscious mind takes over the default system, and how the subconscious, like not even us knowing. I mean, he's given. I don't really remember the examples from the top of my head, but when you're reading the book, you sort of take a pause and you're like, wow, this actually happens. Is how your subconscious, even though you're not consciously thinking of that thought, will have a very crucial or a very significant role in how you think, on a default base. And what mindfulness does is it tries to align these two systems together, which are otherwise very distant. So that you are constantly being mindful and aware, self-aware more than anything else, of your surroundings. And then, what you also then discussed was, sort of the me syndrome. I was recently listening to Robin Sharma. I don't know if you know of him or if you follow him, or if you've read his work. He's the author who wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. Another great book. And then he's come up with the 5 a.m. club. For the listeners, I'm not a spokesperson for Robin Sharma. I just love his work. I follow his work. I think he makes a lot of sense. So he describes this syndrome as the RAM syndrome, which what that means is, WRAM. So world revolves around me syndrome. Which we've seen several examples of these. I see it on a day-to-day basis, and particularly in my field of interventional cardiology, where unfortunately, there are some pretty big egos that one has to deal with. For the field at large, I'm not particularly talking about an institution or a person, but just the field at large. And that's the sense that even the non-invasive cardiologists get from us. And I would like to apologize on behalf of all of us, if that is even something that I should do. But you were saying something. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, we have to acknowledge that certain fields attract certain, personality types, and I think in general, of course, there are always exceptions to every rule, but cardiology attracts a certain go-getter, kind of aggressive, a little bit at least aggressive in terms, in a good way. We worship that. We don't want people to be sitting around, or I've seen this also in various situations where, if a cardiologist is relaxing and also having fun with their life, it's somehow looked down upon, because you're supposed to be go-getting, right? You're supposed to be working nonstop because that's what defines you. And so we've created this impression. So, and then we attract more of the same into the field, right? So, and I think, with regard to egos, I think we all have this issue. It's just where we are on the spectrum, and how self-aware we are of that. So, and again, I don't think it's a flaw per se, but I think it's really human design. And when we are not self-aware, we all have blind spots where we can't see our own flaws, right? And this is why it's so wonderful when we have somebody who can point that out to us in a kind and considerate way. And so we all operate from our blind spots, and so it's just that some of us are more aware of these and try to work through that, and some of us are not. So, and that's what leads to the impression of inflated egos and so on. And I think there are plenty of inflated egos in non-invasive cardiology too, and in every field pretty much. So I don't think it's a flaw per se. I think it's just a matter of not being self-aware enough.
Sure. Ego can be a good thing, but it just turns out that for the vast majority, when it starts to play a role in conversations or in day-to-day lives of people and other professionals, it ends up being a bad character, unfortunately. But and again, this is something that I when I listen to Jay Shetty, who's is a public speaker and an urban monk, he says that when ego loses, the soul wins, which means that when someone challenges your ego, it could be hurtful, it could be negative, it could be construed as rude, or you could take a hit, but deep down there's a lesson for the soul. And as easy as it may be to just say this or sort of go through the explanation, it's actually very hard to practice.
Yeah, it is.
So how have you? I mean, I don't know if you've encountered this in your personal life, or if you know of friends who've encountered such emotions. But if you have, how have you dealt with them, or how have you then mastered your mind or trained yourself to get the best out of that particular emotion or that particular feeling, for you to be able to grow as a person, not only as a physician, but also as a person. I mean, patients say things to us which could be hurtful.
Absolutely.
And, it could challenge the ego. It really could. So curious to learn about this and your thoughts on this.
It's such an important question, right? Because it's such a cause of stress.
Yeah.
When we talk about ego, right, for me, it is, and not for me, from the perspective of the teachings that I, have really studied and teach myself, it's really, ego is not about, what we consider ego is really an overemphasis of something that is it is prevalent, which is what I was talking about earlier, which is the sense of ownership. And it comes from really saying, I am this, or I am that, or I'm so wonderful and I'm so great, or I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. Whether it's one way or the other, that's all part of the ego, right? Because it's really gaining satisfaction from the snippets of stuff that comes up from the default mode network. That's what's making up the ego. And that's what gives rise to the sense of volition, or this ownership of what we do with our patients and with our clinical care and so on. So even, we may also, really label ourselves as being very compassionate, very kind, or this or that, whatever it may be. That's all really part of the ego, right? But what really helps for me and has helped me is to really understand that each of us is a product of our conditioning. And we built this story of me based on our personal experiences, our genetic material, and what we've been taught by our caregivers and society and so on. So what really is important to understand is if I grew up like you in your family and in your exact circumstance, I would be thinking like you. I don't do that because I grew up in mine. Right?
Yeah.
So the story of you, Ankur, is based on that particular linear timeline that you're on. And the story of me is based on my linear timeline. So you see, we are all merely products of our conditioning. So if you say something to me, it's a product of your conditioning, not mine. If I say something to you, it really is a product of my own self-awareness and where I am, and it has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
You see? So when patients or others say things to us, the first thing to understand is that we all do things because of who we are, not because of what anything else is. Mm-hmm. We think the way we are, we do the things that we do because that's who we are. And so when patients say things to me, and of course there are rare circumstances where I have to say, well, I have to end this relationship with this patient because it's not fruitful for either of us. Rarely does that happen, where it's better for them to get care somewhere else, and it's better for me to disengage from that. But other than that, in whether it's in our personal intimate relationships or those with our colleagues or with our patients, it's really important to understand that in any interaction, we are essentially talking to ourselves. Because when I say I'm talking with you, I'm talking with my idea about you, right? And it is only when we are mindful and the default mode network is at rest that I can truly interact with you as you. And for the most part, otherwise, it's one story talking to its own story of the other person. And this is a very, very, this is a very subtle understanding that we arrive at, once we've looked at ourselves over and over time, right? So, and what happens in this situation when we realize this is that there is the natural outcome of this is compassion. Mm-hmm. The natural outcome of this is understanding that really I'm no different from anybody else, and that we are all just doing the best that we can. and so when we understand this, right, then the internal conflict as well as external conflict just goes away. Because all external conflicts come from internal conflicts, right? And so when we understand that in any given situation, people are merely doing what they're programmed to do, then we condone behavior. It's not that we say, oh yeah, it's okay for you to go harm other people. We're not saying that, but we understand why they're doing that. And so when we act from a place of higher understanding, right, suddenly we are devoid of that reactivity and that negativity that comes from trying to correct somebody else's behavior. So for instance, if you're raising children, right, if we become very reactive and all that, then, what we convey to our child is not really necessarily always compassionate. So compassion is really based in seeing that you and I are really not different, mm-hmm. And in that unity of understanding that actually we are the same, there is love and compassion and empathy. And so it's not, we don't need to tell a story about it. I don't need to tell a story that I am compassionate because of this and this. I'm just compassionate, period. There's no need for a because there. So this is the kind of stuff that happens when we do this inner work, right? And so resilience, when it comes to burnout, burnout is a syndrome that comes from not having this broader perspective of human nature, of our own minds, of our own internal landscape. And so we are in conflict with this or that. And that's what causes this burnout, right? I want outcomes to be like this. I want the system to not change. I want them to not do this to me. It's a war, and I've seen some writings on burnout where it's almost like it's like a war against, in quotes, the system. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We are the odds are stacked against us. I saw this in a headline from an email I got about burnout. The odds are stacked against us. I don't think so. I don't feel like that. Yes, of course it's challenging, but there are many changes and so on, and I'm not denying that at all. But when we come to this from a perspective of war, that can't possibly be, nourishing for our well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, excellent discussion. I really enjoyed as much as I've been learning, from you through these conversations. But two central messages. One is on compassion, and again, this is a quote that I read from Jay Shetty. And the quote I think is a fabulous quote in bringing compassion home, like defining compassion for people who just don't understand what compassion is. And that is,
Yeah.
before putting someone in their place, put yourself in their place, right?
Yes.
It's a very simple quote, but it's like it drives the point home.
Yes.
So to me, that is compassion. Before I decide to put someone in their place, I actually should do the mental exercise of putting myself in their place. And
right.
Coming from a different, like you said, upbringing, environment, circumstances, I don't know what they've been going through. So it's easy for me to just, project, what I think about them, what is my idea about them, not knowing, where they're coming from. And
right.
I think,
exactly.
Yeah, and I think we do that. I mean, again, I'm not talking about a particular individual or particular, group of people or institutions, but I think, from the medical community at large, seems to do that a lot, or does that a lot, or at least that's my perception. I don't know if you agree. If you agree, let me know. That way, I know that I'm at least perceiving things the right way.
Yeah.
Um,
I do agree, Ankur, and I think what happens is, I mean, think about our years of training and what it takes for us to be here, right? And it's very easy to become jaded, and I think that is the fundamental problem. It's because there is a disconnect. There is the rewards are not in proportion to the effort we put in, regardless of what the lay community thinks about doctors. A lot, I have felt at various times in my career that it's really not worth it. I don't know why I'm doing this. It's why am I killing myself? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure all of us, the kinds of things that we go through to succeed in medicine, in whatever way that we define success, it takes a lot out of us. And so by the time we come to a point where we feel like, okay, now I can take a breath, by then, all of this happens in our adolescent years, our formative years. And so we never had the opportunity to become self-aware and to see how much we are self-defeating in our own thoughts and the way we interact with others. So I think it's part of that. So I wish there would be more education on self-awareness, starting in primary school, because I think that's what is needed. We can't always keep learning about other things without ever learning about our own minds.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so, coming to my second central theme, which was, you talked about alignment, right? And I completely agree with you. I think aligning the body with the mind and the soul, is very important, because if any of these three components are misaligned or not aligned, there's going to be conflict. So, and I think, at least for me, the purpose is to train the body to master the mind and to enrich the soul. And, we sort of, as we foster exercising and we foster, lean body mass, and just the external training of the body. But, what we seldom miss, this is not medicine, or this is not, medical school or medicine. This is society at large. I think we often miss, training the mind aspect and enriching the soul aspect. And, like you said, all of us are in different, pit stops, if you will, in our journeys toward aligning, the body with the mind and the soul. So which brings me to my last question for the second segment of the mini series of this podcast. And again, thank you for the time. Each time we have a chat, we learn so much. I learned so much from you. That's incredible. How do you practice that on a day-to-day basis, like constant alignment of the mind, the body, and the soul? How do you do that as a busy cardiologist? And how do you foster that, in your colleagues, in peers, in patients, in family, friends? How do you do that?
Well, I think, for me, the answer has been meditation. And, I've been meditating for many, many years. And so what happens with a long-term committed meditation practice is that it just kind of spills over into your daily life, into your moment-to-moment way of thinking and being and interacting, and whether you're cooking, or whether you're seeing patients, or whether for me, I'm reading. I'm a multimodality imager, so I'm constantly reading this study or that study, or teaching, or whatever it is that I'm doing. It's that spilling over of the practice into that moment. So it is just being there and doing that, and there is nothing else going on. When I'm doing one thing, I'm not thinking I should be doing something else, and when I'm doing that thing, I'm not thinking I should be doing that. So when I'm home, I'm home. I'm not thinking about work. When I'm at work, I don't think about anything else. And so it is just being in whatever it is in that. One of my teachers, Swami Chinnaiyan, he used to say, be where your hands are. And so I took that to heart very much. And so it's always about bringing the mind back to where my hands are. And whatever it is I'm doing to bring my mind back to that here, here. It's always here. It's always now. So bringing everything back to this here is the practice. And so when you live from that space, it's like really a slow motion, because there is no this rushing from one thing to another. Even when I'm rushing physically from one thing to another, I don't feel like I am. I don't feel rushed. And I think that's something it's not specific or special to me. It's just what happens with the long-term cultivation of this self-awareness, So you can be very busy, you can be in the middle of chaos and still be very still inside. And it's like being, in the eye of a storm. That's really how that is. So everything is always calm inside. There is no conflict. And even when you are engaged in discussions and potentially what might be perceived as conflict, internally you're completely still. And so that's just something that is cultivated with enough interest and practice over time.
Yeah, no, that's it's great. I think more so in, of course, cardiology, we deal with a lot of acute care, but as an interventional cardiologist, if you can maintain calm and stillness within, it's the perfect environment you can create for yourself. Thank you for all the teaching, and thank you for all the answers. I think they've been terrific. I hope the listenership finds them meaningful and useful and helpful. Once again, thanks for taking the time on a weekend to do the segment with me. I'm going to end the podcast now, and I'm just gonna give a sneak peek to the listenership for the last segment of the series. And thank you for doing the series with us at Parallax. The concluding segment or series, if you will, is going to focus on self-care, which I think is very important. Again, the audience comprises house staff, fellows in training, cardiologists, interventionalists, just physicians at large. And I think it's very important. It's a very important topic for the healthcare provider community, and not only the physician community, but all healthcare providers who work in a healthcare environment. It's very important. Self-care is very important because, what we do can be very consuming. And then, you've also discussed how we'll talk about bringing this to training, right?
Yeah. So we could talk. It'll be more like a synopsis of everything we've discussed, and perhaps get into what needs to change in our field so we embody more of this self-awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, Kavitha, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you so much, Ankur. It was fun.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Dear cardiologists, we want to make this podcast about you and for you. So please email us your critical thoughts, comments and questions at podcast@radcliffe-group.com and visit uscjournal.com for more information. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram at Radcliffe Cardiology for daily updates. Join thousands of cardiologists and become a Radcliffean by registering to radcliffecardiology.com. You will receive regular newsletters and gain access to hundreds of expert interviews, educational webinars, clinical cases, and peer-reviewed articles from our 6 medical review journals on general cardiology, interventional cardiology, arrhythmia and electrophysiology, cardiac failure, and vascular and endovascular surgery. Thank you.